Hello and welcome to the Second Tier Podcast. I'm Ryan Dilks and I'm joined by the Cody and Mings to my Maguire and Stones. It's Justin Peach.
Good day to you, Ryan.
Justin, how the devil are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm very tired, as you can see. I've moved residence. I'm currently redecorating.
For anyone who is listening on the podcast, Justin is speaking from a partly decorated room. I say partly decorated. This is not really decorated at all, is it?
Not at all. Not at all. There's wallpaper hanging from the ceiling, so
yeah, it's you're getting there. You've put in a lot of hard work, haven't you? So I won't disparage your room too much so far.
Makes a change.
Makes a change. You are listening to the biggest championship specific podcast, the Second Tier. Thank you for joining us wherever you are. This is our grading episode where we go through all the teams in the championship, look back at their season, what went right, what went wrong, before giving them a final grade. And this is a two-parter. The second part will come out tomorrow. Me and Justin have individually graded each team. What we've done is the final grade will be whatever's in the middle, but unsurprisingly, we haven't differed too much, really. And it is worth pointing out we're basing it on things like the players that they have available to them, expectations at the start of the season, money that's available as well, all kinds of different things. And that's how we've come to the conclusion for each side. So Justin, let's crack on straight away. We'll do this in alphabetical order, shall we? It's a nice, easy one to start with. Barnsley, what have we gone with for the Tykes, Justin?
It's an A+ for Barnsley.
It absolutely is. And I don't think that really comes as any surprise to anyone, does it? The thing is with Barnsley, no one was expecting too much from this season. I think if they were to finish, we were talking to Carlo, weren't we, from Red Report? He was saying if they finished 21st, they'd have been quite happy with the season. And they have blown everything out of the water, haven't they?
No one could disparage what they've achieved this season. And I think we got a little bit of stick for saying it was one of the biggest achievements in the championship. And if we put that into context, they were minutes away from relegation last season. Gerhard Struber left at the start of this season. They were winless in, I think, the first 7 games of the season. So by that point, and Adam Murray was in caretaker charge for a fair few games after that. So at that point, you're thinking, yeah, okay, these are certs for relegation. But then Ishmael comes in and turns it around, and they finish in the top 6. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. And that's also taking into account their budget, which is by far one of the smaller ones in the division.
Yeah, I don't think we need to spend too much time talking about why Barnsley have got an A+, because we've spoken about them every single week. We spoke about it in the Second Tier Awards, why Valérien Ismaël got Manager of the Year for us. For anyone else to get Manager of the Year would just be balmy, in my view. This squad costs £6 million. It's fighting amongst the likes of Brentford, Norwich, Watford, all clubs with much bigger budgets compared to them. They finished ahead of Bournemouth, and Bournemouth squad cost at least £100 million. So it's a staggering achievement from Barnsley. If there's one criticism that we could possibly give them this season, it's that they haven't made it completely more comfortable for themselves in some games. They won quite a few games by just the one goal, where they probably could have scored more. And then the only other criticism I'd give them is their record against the better teams in the division, because I think they only won 3 of the games against the other sides in the top 6 this season. Yeah. We're cherry picking here, aren't we, Justin, with the criticisms that we're giving, because otherwise there isn't really much you can criticise Barnsley for this season.
Almost faultless. As you say, it gets them grounded a little bit by just picking a few little things, because if they improve upon them things, who knows what can happen next season?
Exactly. They've set themselves a fantastic foundation for another go at it next season, and I firmly believe they can do that. It all depends on who they bring in. Justin, let's move on to the next one. The next one we've got is Birmingham, who we've given a D-. Why have we given Birmingham that grade?
Well, I mean, where they finished this season, for example, it wasn't up until Bowyer was put in charge of Birmingham City. I was convinced they were going down under Karanka. In fact, they were the only team I was completely certain about at that point, over than Wickham. And then Bowyer came in and they turned it around. But they did the same thing last season, and probably the same thing season before. It's a constant cycle for Birmingham City. You just find yourself constantly tutting at Birmingham City, which is it's where they are at the minute, and they need to significantly improve. But this season, they were terrible for I don't know, 9/10 of it, and then the final section of the season they picked up under Bowyer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if it wasn't for that kind of end of season spring under Lee Bowyer, then we'd have given them a much lower score, and they would have probably been much lower in the table as well. They were pretty terrible under Aitor Karanka. It's worth saying, if you look at how they've done across the whole season, they were pretty much, before Karanka was sacked, they were pretty much as we were expecting, really, weren't they, in terms of our expectations? I think we had them just finishing outside the relegation zone in our start of the season predictions. So they didn't really surprise too much, but that nice little run under Bowyer that they had after Karanka was sacked has kind of saved them, really. I think a D- is a fair assessment of their season. It was pretty miserable up until a nice little couple of decent results towards the end. It's a nice foundation as well for Lee Bowyer heading into this season as well. Let's move on to Blackburn, Justin. They've had a bit of a mixed season, haven't they? We've given them a C. Why have we given them that grade?
Well, again, attacking wise, at times they've been the best in the division, and at times they've not been very good at all. Defensively, at times they've looked very good, and at other times they've looked really bad. At no point have they got it clicking together at the same time, because if they got it clicking together at the same time, there's a team here who can make a very good assault on the playoffs. So them being graded a C is sort of an epitome, the epitome of that. Essentially, they've not got everything to click at the same time. And as we've seen with where they finished, they started okay. They had a bad mid-season and then had a fairly good last 4 or 5 games.
Yeah, it's been a patchy season for Blackburn, hasn't it? They've had some fantastic individual performances from the likes of Adam Armstrong. Harvey Elliott's had a fantastic season. It surprises me that hasn't been more talk of how good a season Harvey Elliott's had, but that's by the by. It's just the results, isn't it? I think for quite some time, they hadn't picked up a result against any team in the top half of the table, which is quite damning. They were almost flat track bullies for much of the season, Blackburn, and it's all about consistency. There are plenty of teams. This is going to be a common thing in this episode where we talk about consistency. Blackburn are one of those teams who have really struggled with consistency throughout the season, haven't they? Well,
yeah, I think finishing 15th just tells you exactly where they've struggled, which is consistency, because Preston weren't too far away, which are another team who fell into that category. But as you say, it's been a good season for individuals, but the players around those individuals haven't been consistent enough themselves. So I think them finishing 15th is probably one of the worst things that could have happened to them this season, because it looked like they were going to make a real go of it. They brought in some really good players. Obviously, Harvey Elliott was a great signing on loan, and there were others. Daniel Ayala came in. I know he didn't play much, but there was the makings of a good assault here. But that lack of consistency just saw them fall away.
Yeah, it really did. And in hindsight, I'm looking at it now thinking maybe we've been a bit kind to Blackburn, but maybe a C is because they're at two ends of the scale, aren't they? When they were an A, they were absolutely fantastic, but at the same time, we've seen them be an E plenty of times this season. So I suppose C is right in the middle, isn't it? Justin, next up is Bournemouth. We've given them a C-. And I think that's largely down to how bloody good this squad is, and the fact that they've only finished the season by squeezing into the playoffs.
And I'm thinking here, I think perhaps we've been a bit too kind to Bournemouth, giving them a C-. I know we just mentioned Blackburn being a bit kind to them, but this season is a categorical failure for Bournemouth, not being promoted, or I think firstly not being promoted through the playoffs, obviously, but also being nowhere near the top 2. Was there a time this season where they challenged the top 2? I can't really recall them getting near it, and obviously Tyndall getting sacked when they were 8th back in January. It's been a massive failure for Bournemouth with the squad that they have.
Oh, absolutely. They were lurking around the top 2 at around Christmas time, I recall, but then everything went drastically tits up, and that ultimately led to Jason Tyndall being sacked. They have shown at times that they can be a fantastic attacking side. Of course, with the talent they've got, you'd expect that. I remember around late autumn time, they were looking like they were finally becoming the team that many people were expecting them to, with the likes of Brooks, Danjuma, Solanke. These are bloody good players at this level. And then all of a sudden, it all went wrong. Maybe that was in part to key players like Danjuma and Brooks getting injured. But having said that, you'd still expect a lot better from a Bournemouth squad that has got so much talent in it. And we saw with Woodgate in that fantastic run where they won 7 games in a row. Once again, they were absolutely fantastic. But it was just at the other end of the scale as well, where they weren't picking up results, where they were just so bad.
Yeah, exactly. And I think finishing 14 points off the top 2, there are sections in the season where they've been massively let down by their form. But as you say, with the players that they have, did they have enough in the reserves to make the assault on the top 2 in terms of backup options? There's Dominic Solanke, but then who's the next guy in line? Sam Surridge, who I do rate, wasn't fancied by Woodgate. I know Josh King was there, but did they have enough in reserve? Essentially, Watford have got a big squad. Norwich had a big squad. Brentford had a big squad. Bournemouth had a very good starting 11, arguably the best starting 11 in the division. And obviously, they just came up short, very short, in fact, and they squoze into the playoffs in the last few games. So, it's not a good season from top to bottom, really, from the management of the club to the playing staff.
You just say squoze.
Let's just gloss over that quite quick.
Good vocabulary there. The other thing is Bournemouth is so vulnerable defensively. Even though you talk about the big names at the other end of the pitch, even in defence, they've still got some players who you expect to defend really well, but they just weren't, quite frankly. They were very easily got at, especially when it came to crosses into the box and attacking out wide. So there's definitely a lot to work on from a Bournemouth perspective. This has been a massively disappointing season. The fact that they've managed to get in the playoffs has provided some, relief from that standpoint, but there's still a lot of money that is in this side. And for them to, if you said to someone at the start of the season that Bournemouth would squeeze into the playoffs right at the end, you'd say, well, that has been a really, really poor season. And it pretty much is. Next up is Brentford, Justin. They got a B+. Now, I'm not sure if this would have changed much had they not got promoted from the playoffs. Do you think it would have maybe moved down your grade a bit?
Yeah, obviously, because their ultimate aim is to be promoted. That's the ultimate ambition of the club is to get promotion. So yeah, they probably would have perhaps gone down to a B-, C+, had they not been promoted. But I think that's probably the only reason why it's not an A, is because they didn't finish in the top 2, because it was a near perfect season where, again, they showed that they can progress without key players of the previous season. Watkins, Benrahma, they left, and they replaced them as we know they do. But as well as that, Frank saved the season by changing it to a 3 at the back at one point in the season. They became a very hard team to beat, which they had to do at the point that they did towards the end of the season, because they were dropping points, and that change in formation carried them over the line. And if it was done sooner, it might have been a top 2 finish for them.
I think that's been the main difference from last season, isn't it? They have become a much more difficult to beat side. Defensively, they've been much more solid. They've been able to shithouse games a bit more, and we laugh, but that is a crucial thing to be able to do at this level, to be able to squeeze out results when it's not necessarily going your way. They were let down quite a bit by their form in the final third of the season, where they were drawing plenty of games and not necessarily getting wins on the board, and that ultimately led to them missing out on the top 2, getting overtaken by Watford. But people have got to remember, this Brentford side have had one of the highest points tallies ever for a third place side. And that is quite an achievement. If it wasn't for, Norwich and Watford finishing the season so strongly and getting such a fantastic points tally, then Brentford would have gone up automatically. They managed to salvage that at the end by obviously finishing third and getting promoted through the playoffs. But I think overall, despite not getting up automatically, it's still been a fantastic season as a whole for Brentford.
Yeah, I mean, winning in the playoffs is a massive achievement. It doesn't matter if you squeeze into the playoffs on the last day or the last minute of the season, or you're third the whole way through the season and you're in there comfortably. Winning the playoffs is an achievement. I think the underlying factor here is that Brentford have lost the same amount of games as Norwich. So they've lost the same amount of games as the team that's won the league. It's just as you mentioned, they drew too many games. It's fine margins that has essentially let them down at certain points in the season, but they did it in the end. It's been a very good season, a brilliant season actually for Brentford, and a massive achievement, first time in the Premier League.
Yep, fantastic individual performances as well. Of course, Ivan Toney, we can't go without mentioning him. Ethan Pinnock's had a fantastic season as well. Rico Henry had a good season before he got injured, and he may very well have been the difference in getting them in the automatics in the final third of the season. But I think B+, solid effort for Brentford. If they manage to get up automatically, then that maybe have been boosted up to an A. Final one, just before we go to a break, Justin. Bristol City. Now, this was an interesting one. They're one of many teams who we're going to go through in these two episodes, Justin, who have had Jekyll and Hyde seasons, to say the very least. And I think Bristol City are maybe the most drastic case of that. What final grade have we given them?
We've given them an E.
Yeah. And I don't think that's too unfair. One thing that I will say when I was putting together my grades is I was very wary of not letting recency bias, blind my judgment when it comes to some of these teams.
Yeah.
QPR being one main example, who we'll obviously get onto later, who finished the season fantastically, but weren't necessarily very good in the first half of the season. Bristol City were absolutely atrocious in the second half of the season. And I don't think many Bristol City fans will particularly disagree with me if I were to say that in that second half of the season, they were probably the worst team in the Championship.
I think one of the things that you said several times was if there's a few more games in this season, then this team could very well be relegated. And it's one of the things. It's quite a bad indictment of the team. One thing that needs to be considered, which might make the grade a bit harsh, is the amount of injuries they have had. At no point did Dean Holden have his best 11, for example, which they started okay. They even had me thinking there might be a bit of a playoff challenge here, but then the injuries started to come in. I think losing Andy Vyman was a huge blow. Jamie Patterson at a key time, and then Callas as well at one time. They lost pretty much a first teamer in every position. So there's a lot of sympathy there, but after that, it was bad. It was really bad.
Extremely bad. They picked up the joint fewest points in 2021. And as you say, in the first half of the season, they were looking like they could be a decent bet for the playoffs. But that clearly went very wrong very quickly. And injuries did play a part. I'm not completely sold on that being a valid excuse for everything going completely tits up. Bristol City fans will disagree with me on that. They've told me plenty of times that they disagree with me on that. But I don't think that can be used as a valid excuse for nearly going down if there are a few extra games on the end of the season. So, yeah, it's been a very disappointing season from a Bristol City perspective. But it is worth saying that they were very promising in that short spell under Dean Holden earlier in the season when they were looking quite good. And as we say, if we're taking into account how they did across the whole of the season, then that is the main reason why they're not an even lower grade than they are.
Yeah. Was it a 6-game spell under Holden? It wasn't. I think they were unbeaten in the first few games this season. But as you say, the injury pile up, it can't be used as an excuse because they're overloaded in certain positions, whereas being quite low in numbers in others. So yeah, the recruitment has almost contributed to that impact a little bit by not being well balanced throughout the team. But yeah, it was a bad season, as you say. It showed promising signs, but it was just a flickering of the light bulb before it completely went out. That's all it ever was for Bristol City this season.
And if we're talking about expectations at the start of the season as well, Bristol City were one of those sides who we thought could probably be challenging for the playoffs, because the squad as a whole was looking quite good on paper, the likes of Naki Wells and what have you. But these players, Wells being one of them, just haven't lived up to expectations when they have been on the pitch this season, and
underperformed.
Massively underperformed. And there's quite a few alarm bells at Bristol City. Maybe if they had a more experienced manager at the very start of the season, things wouldn't have gone as bad as they were. But we'll just have to see how they manage to pull things together over the course of the summer. Justin, let's have a quick break. After that, we'll talk about Cardiff, Coventry. I'm looking forward to this one. Derby. Welcome back to the second tier podcast. We're grading each of the teams in the Championship from the past season to see how we think they did. The next up on the agenda is Cardiff, Justin. How do we think the Bluebirds did?
We gave them a C.
Yeah, and I would say C is a fair grade, because they're another one who have had differing seasons, not maybe to the extent of Bristol City, but the first half and the second half of the season were very different sides, weren't they?
It's chalk and cheese, wasn't it? The first half and the second half. It was. I imagine it was frustrating from my perspective as a neutral spectator, looking at this Cardiff team and thinking at the start of the season, the playoffs. This is a good squad here, and then towards the end of the transfer window, big signing: Shea Ojo, Harry Wilson. These talented players, they come in. Kiefer Moore was already there, obviously. They come in, and you're thinking, yeah, quite easily the playoffs. But the form in the first half of the season under Neil Harris was really quite poor, quite checkered. I'm surprised he lasted right through to sort of mid to end January. And then Mick McCarthy came in, had that ridiculously good run. I know they fell off a little bit towards the end, but there was a glimpse of what this team can do under him. So yeah, it was very much a D-E first half of the season to a B sort of C plus second half of the season.
Yeah, you're spot on. The thing is, we infamously thought Cardiff were going to be fantastic this season at the very start of the season. I think we had them second in our start of the season predictions.
Could have put my house on it.
Well, second, in hindsight, it seems mental that we put them there, but the fact that they didn't even finish in the playoffs is a disappointing season as a whole. It has managed to finish relatively well under Mick McCarthy compared to how it was going. I think the one thing that has boosted this score is the performances of individual players, namely Kiefer Moore, who's had a fantastic season. Sean Morrison is another one who's had a fantastic season, not just defensively, but at set pieces as well. We've seen the good and the bad with Cardiff, haven't we, this season?
Definitely. That's what I alluded to. It was chalk and cheese, wasn't it? With the individuals, Aidan Flint came in after his loan spell at Sheffield Wednesday and it was one of the best defenders in the league in the second half of the season. He was brilliant under Mick McCarthy, and they've got good players at Cardiff. But at no point, other than Kiefer Moore, maybe Sean Morrison, at no point were any of them really, really consistent or really, really good throughout the whole season. Harry Wilson, for example, I thought underperformed for large chunks of the season. I don't think Neil Harris got the best out of certain players. There's a lot of good wide players, for example. There's Murphy, there's Hoylett, but they weren't really providing, other than Kiefer Moore hitting 20, which is a fantastic return. Where's the next player scoring goals? Harry Wilson hit 7, and then there's several others on 5. So there was a lot of holes in this team, and we mentioned before throughout the season, they're creating a lot of chances from set pieces. What are they doing from open play? Not a lot.
Yeah, it's a season that had the potential to be very good, and it wasn't. But it wasn't a disaster. And I think if you wanted to summarise Cardiff's season in just a sentence, just take what I've just said there and use that repeatedly. Justin, the next club on the list is Coventry. What grade have we given them?
We've given them a lofty B.
Yeah. In hindsight, maybe we've ranked them a bit too high there, but
Oh, no.
do you think? I just think Coventry were one of those sides, weren't they, where at times we saw them be absolutely fantastic. I remember when they played against Brentford very early on in the season, and they put in a fantastic performance, and we were asking ourselves, why can't they do that every single week? And that has been pretty much the story of Coventry's season. They finished well with a decent run of results, which ultimately pulled them away from the relegation battle. But apart from that, they were hovering around there for pretty much the whole season.
Okay, so here's my theory. Matt Godden and Tyler Walker managed just 56 games between them. So they're missing their first team strikers. They're missing their first team strikers for half of the season. Had they have been fit for the full season, I think Coventry are comfortably hovering above the relegation zone rather than putting their arm over the shoulder of the relegation zone. That's my theory, because they play good football. They play good attacking football. They can be defensive when they want to be. There's potential to mix up here, which is the foundations of a top team. So there's a lot of good here for Coventry, which is why I think a B is a very good grade. It's the right grade for Coventry, in my opinion.
When you consider that they had just got promoted back into the Championship for the first time in quite some time, and it was still a very young squad, not much money spent on it, then maybe a B is a fair, record for Coventry. It's just when we thought that they might be able to do a bit more this season, really stand up and make themselves counted as a accomplished Championship side, that didn't necessarily happen until the very end of the season. But yeah, maybe a B is a fair reflection on Coventry's season. It's one that has set the foundations for a better season next season, hasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. This is it's what I was saying, because if the recruitment was good last season, just think what it can be with a year in the Championship with maybe a little bit more resource. Just think how much better it can be going into the next season. And there are positions that can be improved upon. For example, there's Dominic Hyen, but Leo Ostergaard's left. His loan spell's finished, so they'll need to bring somebody else. Keeper is a position that they'll need to bring somebody in. So there are areas that can be improved upon. But I think Coventry City coming up to the Championship after such a long time out of it, having two key players. They're just two that are highlighted. There are other players that have had injury as well this season. There's a lot of good here for Coventry, and I think it needs to be acknowledged.
Fair enough. Next up is Derby, and we've given them a big fat F. Derby off the pitch have been an F for quite some time, haven't they? But on the pitch, they've managed to avoid it necessarily interfering with how results have been going. But this seemed to be finally the season where off the field events caught up with them, and they were pretty dreadful. And I was looking at it thinking, is F harsh? Because they haven't necessarily gone down, but considering many people would have probably expected them to finish in the top half of the season, for them to only stay up by the skin of their teeth, I think an F maybe is a fair result.
You rip up the exam paper and throw it back at them, wouldn't you? If it was an actual exam being graded, they've
just drawn penises all over the exam paper, haven't they?
they've made a mockery of it. It's been
told the examiner to screw FFP.
It's F for FFP. That's what it is.
There we go.
It's been a circus of a season. It's been more failed takeovers at Derby this season than they featured in the top half of the league. Which was 0, by the way. So they could have even had one failed takeover, but they had 2. So 2-0 to that. Defensively, they looked organised at times. Going forwards, they've been incredibly shy. There were striker links. This is why I feel sorry for Philip Koku, because the strikers they were linked with in the last summer, all hit over 20 goals this season. Kiefer Moore and Serda Dursun, who plays for Darmstadt in Germany. They're just 2 of the linked players. Lost Chris Martin as well, so I do feel sorry for him. I feel sorry for Rooney a little bit as well, because he was shafted in January by the transfer embargo. But as you say the scenes off the field didn't catch up with him. I think it impacted the team all the way through the season.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're not getting paid your wages, it's always going to affect you, isn't it? I
Doesn't
mean,
help.
it doesn't help. If anyone who's listening didn't get paid their wages at work, you wouldn't necessarily be as motivated, would you? I think that's goes without saying. So yeah, it's definitely finally caught up with Derby, and now the club is staring down the abyss of what the future holds, because who knows what the future holds at this point. Yeah, I just think an F is a very good reflection. As you say, if there's one positive, it has been defensively. They've actually been all right. But going forwards, what's below a U? I don't know, but they've been absolutely abysmal going forwards. And here we are now wondering where Derby are going to be next season. Next up is another side who aren't particularly good going forwards. That's Huddersfield, Justin. We've given them a D. Now, they are one of these Jekyll and Hyde sides, aren't they, who did all right in the first half of the season. They were around mid-table and looked like they were going to have a nice, solid transition season under Carlos Corberán. But in the second half of the season, it all very nearly went very wrong. Partly down to injuries, but it wasn't very good to watch, was it?
No, I mean we saw glimpses of Corberán's style in the first half of the season, not only with the pressing and the counter-attacking, or the counter-pressing, I should say, but also his chinos, which were a breath of fresh air, really, because we're used to seeing we're used to seeing black trousers and those plimsolls that have the white tip around the edges, but he wore chinos and white trainers, which was fantastic, and that needs to be considered here because that's generally one of the plus points of Huddersfield's season.
That's the only reason I didn't give them an E.
Yeah, exactly. I've lost my train of thought. Chinos, okay, style of play. Yeah, it was clicking at times for Huddersfield, and the injury to Josh Cromer is one of them injuries. There's another team who we'll move on to later on, who had a similar impact after a player got injured. Josh Cromer's injury didn't derail them, but it really left them light up front, and I think because they were light all over the pitch, it showed towards the end of the season. I think they were one of the teams that have used the most players this season. They were signing anybody and everybody. I was at one point thinking April that I might be able to get a contract with Huddersfield because they were looking like they were going to bring in anyone who rang them up, essentially. I think that's sort of testament as to how the season went, because injuries started to pile up and they didn't have any really good backups to bring them in. So they brought in Johnny off the street, essentially.
All I'm going to say is if they did have you at centre-back, then I don't think they would have conceded as many goals. That's no reflection on you as a footballer. It's just Huddersfield was so bad defensively.
That was a compliment.
No, they picked up the joint fewest points in 2021. They had the fewest wins as well. It was a fairly disastrous 2021 from a Huddersfield point. And it was partly down to injuries, but I don't think Carlos Corberán's tactics really helped. He was very stubborn in the way that he was sticking to the way they were playing. And even though results weren't going their way, he didn't want to change it. And that's ultimately what led to their results not getting any better and seemingly getting worse. They were very much helped by 4 teams in Derby, Wednesday, Rotherham and Wycombe being fairly hopeless compared to them. Because if it wasn't for Huddersfield being a fairly steady side in the first half of the season, then they probably would have gone down or at least been closer to the relegation zone. So the fact that around Christmas time, they were looking like a steady mid-table side and finished above the really bad teams in the division is quite an indictment on how the season's gone for Huddersfield. And a D is very much a reflection on the second half of the season, as opposed to them being a steady mid-table side in the first half of the season. Justin, next up is Luton. What grade have we given to Luton Town?
We've gone with A-.
Yeah, and the fact that they have finished as a mid-table side, some Championship fans might be looking at that and thinking that's quite generous, but explain to our listeners why we've given Luton Town A-.
They fall into the same category as Barnsley, where they scraped staying up on the final day of last season. you've got to remember how bad they were last season, how bad they were defensively. I think they conceded the most goals in the league last season, but Nathan Jones came in, saved them from relegation, essentially, and it carried on into this season. They've probably lacked goals at times. That might be one of the reasons as to why they haven't finished higher, which is, again, 12th is a lofty position for Luton Town, given that they were a non-league side 10 years ago. Goals has been an issue at times, but defensively they've been so good, and off the ball, they're one of the most hardworking teams in the division. They brought in players like Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall, for example, who has probably, in fact, he was Luton's best player because he swept up the awards. So there's a really good group of players at Luton growing, and again, there's something brewing at Luton which can easily go into next season.
Yeah, Barnsley, you compare them to Barnsley just a second ago. Barnsley have accomplished so much this season on what is pretty much pocket change compared to other clubs in the Championship. But Luton are even below that. They're like the level below Barnsley in terms of the financial side of things, because they don't spend money on players, really, do they? And if they do, it's for what? 300 grand, around that kind of, budget, really. They rely a lot on free agents, loans, and what Nathan Jones has managed to get together here is a real unit of a side. The togetherness at Luton, it sounds patronising whenever I say this, but the togetherness at Luton is just fantastic, and that has ultimately led to them finishing where they have done this season. For them to finish where they have amongst some sides who have spent an awful lot of money at Championship level is a remarkable achievement for Nathan Jones. And it goes a bit under the radar because of how well Valérien Ismaël has done this season, and Daniel Farke for managing to get Norwich straight back into the Premier League at the first time of asking. But Nathan Jones, you can't underestimate how fantastic a job he's done this season.
Yep, he's got a group of hardworking players, and he's a manager who will die for the cause. There's that Neil Warnock quote saying you've got to fucking die for 3 points, and Nathan Jones is that in a nutshell as well. And
the thing is, I worry that Nathan Jones might literally die for 3 points.
He looks a very stressed man on the sidelines, so there is a bit of a stress. But that passion, it filters into the team, and you can see it on the pitch, which is why they are a likeable side, and they finished above Stoke, which is a massive one-up for Nathan Jones.
Yeah, Stoke fans won't thank you for that, but it definitely is. Luton are performing above all expectations this season, and for them to finish where they have is a fantastic achievement. It's, again, another great foundation for them to push on next season and just to keep accomplishing what they can do. And maybe one day we could see them push for the playoffs. Who knows? Final one of this episode, Justin, is Middlesbrough. We've given them a C+. Why have we given Borough that score?
There was a point in the season where they were the best defensive team in the league, and you could see that they were so mean defensively. But it started to even itself out as the season went on. The goals dried up, the chances, they kept creating chances. They're a team this season that have always created chances, but they've lacked a goal scorer, and defensively they started to leak goals. So it all started to balance out for Borough, which is ultimately why they finished 10th. On reflection, it is a good season for Borough. They were really bad under Jonathan Woodgate. And again, Neil Warnock came in with 3 games to go last season, or 6 games to go.
Not many.
Not many games. And Kevin Blackwell literally had to desert his kitchen that was halfway through being done to get the job with Warnock at Borough. And it proved to be a good thing because it has paid off for Borough. And I think, again, they're a team who, for me, can build into next season. It's been a very nice transition for them, so they're a one to watch out for coming into the new season. But this season, definitely okay.
Yeah, I think a transition season wouldn't necessarily do them a disservice, really. You have got to remember, Neil Warnock started the season with just a dozen players. They weren't very heavy on terms of squad depth, were they? And they've had to recruit players throughout the season, the likes of Duncan Watmore, Yannick Bolasie, Cabano. These players have all come in during the course of the season and just joined in with things, really. And the fact that they started the season so well defensively is a real credit to Neil Warnock as a manager, being such a fantastic operator at this level. It was just the other end of the pitch where they were really struggling. However, they were creating chances, weren't they? It was just putting them in the back of the net, which was a real issue. And that's not been helped by the injuries to Assombalonga and Fletcher, and also the form of their strikers like Akpom and Assombalonga. So, yeah, it's definitely been a good season for Middlesbrough. I don't think there's any denying that. 10th, if you offered a Middlesbrough fan 10th at the start of this season after what was nearly an absolute disaster last season, I think they probably would have taken it.
Yeah, you'd be happy. As you say, it's all about context. They were bad under Woodgate, really, really bad. They're on the freeway to relegation essentially under him, and it was recovered. But as you say, doesn't start with a dozen players at the start of the season. Duncan Watmore has been an incredibly good acquisition. Came in after 6 or 7 games. So he didn't start the season with Borough. So it's been a group that's been put together as Neil Warnock has gone along with the season, which is typical Neil Warnock. But that just goes to show what he can do given more time and more progress.
Yeah, it's been a good season for Middlesbrough, hasn't it? Just good. I think, say no more on that point. Justin, that pretty much wraps us up for the first episode, or the first part of the season grading episode. We're just going to quickly run through the grades that we've given each of the teams. Barnsley, we've given an A+, Birmingham, D-, Blackburn, C, Bournemouth, C-, Brentford, B+, Bristol City, E, Cardiff, C, Coventry, B, Derby, F, Huddersfield, D, Luton, A-, and Middlesbrough, C+. So we'll be back again on Sunday to give you part 2 of our gradings. And we look forward to seeing you then. This has been the Second Tier Podcast. We'll be back again on Sunday. I've been Brian Dilks.
I've been Justin Peach.
Thank you for listening.